All right, now the next thing we want to do is talk about what is called completing the square. So let me just show you how nice it is to teach online sometimes. I can just clear this slide and pull that handout right back up all nice and cleaned off here and still hit it with the colors and even go different colors very quickly. Now remember, and we're going to do some of these, I want you all to refer to these steps right here. Okay. Now, it looks like there's going to be 4 steps. I think on some of the handouts I've got 3 steps, but they all follow the same thing. 1, make sure it is in this quadratic form order, and make sure this A number is positive. All right, so I'm going to clear this slide here. Refer to this if you've got your handout, okay? And if you don't have your handout, of course, you can find one in course documents in Angel. Now, here's what I mean. Let's go back to a quadratic equation. X squared minus 6x minus 1 equals 0. All right, so this topic we're talking about now is called, for lack of a better name, completing the square. All right, this process is called complete because you can't factor this trinomial. I mean, you might try to break it apart and go x plus minus, but if you did, it would be uh-oh. So step number 1 on completing the square, if you refer back to your handout, is to make sure that this first number in front of the x squared is a 1. And if it's not equal to 1, you must make it equal 1 by dividing each term by whatever that number is. Now, in this first example, Young made it 1, so life is very good. This is one of the nicest completing the square examples you'll ever see. Step 2 says, get it in this form by moving the 1 over and leaving a blank here. So you're going to have x squared minus 6x plus blank equals 1 plus blank. And actually what Young calls this step is the blankety blank step. We'll spell that. B-L-A-N-K-E-T-Y blankety blank. All right. Now look at the step next to that now below. Once you get it in this form, what you do is you take half of the B number, which is negative 6. So what is half of that? I hope everyone would tell me, and I'll write it right above here. That's negative 3. So to complete the square, take half of this number here in front of the x, square it, and add it to both sides of the equation. Now this revolutionized math for a while there, back in the late 17th century, early 18th century, because something that did not factor, watch this ladies and gentlemen, now factors because it is a perfect square trinomial from chapter 5. What does that mean, Young? Well, it means it's going to factor into 2 of the same creatures. You're going to get x minus minus, but, and then hopefully you're going to say 3, which if you FOIL will give you that trinomial above. So here's what we get sophisticatedly. X minus 3 quantity squared equals 10. And then, does that look familiar? Solve by the square root method. See, so I had to start with the square root method first. So to get x, to get your 2 answers, we are going to take the square root of both sides. Say x minus 3 equals, did you remember the plus or minus? Huge! Plus or minus the square root of 10. And to get x by itself, you just add 3 to both sides. So your 2 answers, ladies and gentlemen, would be x equals 3 plus the square root of 10, or 3 minus the square root of 10. And if we actually wanted to get number answers, let's pull out our calculators here real quick. And I'm going to do that here as we talk. I'm going to take the square root of 10, and I'm going to add 3. Now my calculator says that the square root of 10 is about 3.16. And hang on just a second here. I've got to get rid of this calculator here. I've got this old beat up one here on my desktop. I really need to get a better one. I get about 6.16 if I round that a few decimal places. So this is about 6.16. And if you take 3 minus the square root of 10, we can also get an answer on our calculators here. So let's do that one next. So I'm going to take 3 minus the square root of 10, and that comes out about negative 0.16. So check those values on your calculators there, negative 0.16, and those are your two answers. See, so if it's not a nice perfect square number that you're taking the square root of, and I'll circle that over here in orange, if this is not a nice perfect square number, you get these irrational looking answers. And remember, these numbers here go on forever without ending, without repeating. I mean, I just rounded them to 2 places, but if you look on your calculator after that, it just goes, yeah. All right, so let's try another example of completing the square here. I want to do a few more for you, because this will, of course, be on your last test and probably your final exam and probably heading into college algebra next term. So I'm going to take, for the next example here, x squared plus 6x minus 2 equals 0. Another trinomial that won't factor. How can it be? How can it be? I'm sorry, it just doesn't factor. All right, so what we're going to do on this one, the first number is a 1. Don't have to mess with that, okay? So we want to go ahead and get this negative 2 moved over for step 2, so we get the famous, young teams, blankety blank. So add 2 to both sides and leave that blank in there, because that number we're going to put in the blank is said to what? Complete the square. All right, so to complete the square, we are going to take half of this number 6 in the middle, which is 3, square it. That gives us 9. And of course, if you add something to one side of an equation, you must do it to the other side. So we're taking half of this number, squaring it, adding it to both sides. Now, something that did not factor to begin with factors into x plus, but, 3, and yes, 2 of the same things always happen if you do it right, and you get x plus 3 quantity squared equals 11, and now we solve for x using the square root method. All right, so we're going to take the square root of both sides of this creature. X plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 11, which does not simplify. Now, if that did simplify, you have to watch out and simplify it. All right, so be careful there. And then subtract 3 from both sides. So your two answers up here would be x equals negative 3 plus the square root of 11, or negative 3 minus the square root of 11. So again, usually 2 answers for your quadratic equation. And those my online students, or even my lecture students, they may leave the answer like this in some of your textbooks. They may just put both of those answers together like this and say, well, it'd be negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 11. But see, if I was going to use my calculators and actually approximate both of those answers, I would want to split that plus or minus up to get the 2 answers like I did in the previous example. All right, now I'm going to try the toughest type of completing the square problem. Some of you may not like this one, but that's okay. Let me pose this question. What if someone gave us 6x squared minus 3 equals 6x? Now, this thing's not even in order or anything. Now, remember, we always want to try to force this quadratic form order, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 starting out. So I'm going to get that by moving the 6x over here, and hopefully y'all could tell me you would do that by subtracting. So this is like the worst creature here. So you get 6x squared minus 6x minus 3 equals 0. Now, oh young, this number in front here is not a 1. It's a 6. So it has to be a 1 before you can complete the square. So we are going to divide both sides of the equation by 6, giving us x squared minus x minus 3, 6 reduces to 1/2 equals 0. So, fraction and everything, All right, so we got it into our form here. We got that first number, now a 1 here, so that's good. So we can now continue the process and move the negative 1/2 over to get, you know what, the blankety blank. So x squared minus x plus blank equals 1/2 plus blank. So you add 1/2 to both sides. Okay, now take half of the number in front of the x. Now a lot of students might spaz here. They might freak out, but wait a minute, young, I don't see a number here. Well, that's half of negative 1, which would be negative 1/2. So you have to take half of this middle number in front of the x there, square it, and that's what goes in the blankety blanks. Y'all know what negative 1/2 squared is? Positive 1/4. And if you do it to one side, you must do it to both sides. So students really don't like these because there's fractions involved. Yuck. All right, now this will factor into two of the same things. Even if it's fractions, don't worry about it. You're going to get x minus minus, but it's going to be a half to get a fourth. 1/2 times 1/2 will give you the 1/4, and if you FOIL it, it will give you that minus 1x in the middle, because you'll have minus 1/2 x FOILing the outside, minus 1/2 x FOILing the inside, and minus 1/2 is minus a whole. So you're going to get x minus 1/2 quantity squared equals, well, we're going to have to get a common denominator above here. We have to put these fractions together. So 1/2 would become 2/4, and 1/4, we would get 3/4. So yes, you can have fractions. Take the square root of both sides. You're going to end up, and I'll move it up here in case I'm losing somebody off the screen, you'll get x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2. Now, young, wait a minute, how'd you get that? Well, notice the square root of 3/4, if you use the quotient rule, you can break it into the square root of 3 over the square root of 4, and see that square root of 4 comes out nicely as 2. So even with fractions, these are doable. Add 1/2 to both sides, and you get your two answers. So x is going to equal 1/2 plus the square root of 3 over 2, or what? 1/2 minus the square root of 3 over 2. And those would be your two answers. Now that was a lot more work, wasn't it, when that first number wasn't a 1. I never promised you a rose garden. So young, you're mean.